Welcome back, folks. Look at this smile. That's right. Today I'm going to be doing a review on The Happiest Man on Earth by Eddie Jaku. Give you a little line of what this book's all around. A Holocaust survivor shares how he found gratitude, kindness, and hope in the darkest of places. So, as you might have guessed, this is a Holocaust book. Now, The Happiest Man on Earth, I was gifted this particular one. And Eddie, he is the author, and I believe he actually wrote this book as well. Now, full name was Abraham Solomon Jakubowicz, but my friends, you can call him Eddie. And that's one interesting thing that Eddie does throughout this book. He refers to you as his friend. He makes you feel quite welcome to read his story. So let's begin at the very beginning. What is this book all about? So basically, he considered himself, Eddie, a German first and a Jew second. So obviously he was born and raised in Germany, and obviously that was until November 1938, when he was essentially beaten, bruised, and his arduous sort of journey then went through. Now, the book itself, as some of the usual Holocaust style books, talks about life pre-war, pre-World War II, then onto the stage of everything that happened in relation to being taken to concentration camps, being beaten, the way they were tortured, deprived of food, etc. And then beyond into what happened afterwards. So for Eddie, that meant moving away from Belgium and Germany to Australia, and actually continuing his life on from there. So that's really the premise of the book. It's actually a really short book as well. It's around 189 pages. The actual writing itself is not, sometimes you see a book that's packed to the edges. This one is not, so it's nice and clean. So some general thoughts on the actual book that I have. So the first thing I want to talk about was the way that Eddie has split out this book. So usually with the types of books, you'll generally get into the storyline. You don't take away too many learnings as opposed to getting just enthralled by the story and being really captivated by it. But he does a really phenomenal job on sort of cutting the story down chapter by chapter. And each chapter is actually prefaced by a particular little quote. And that quote sort of serves the purpose of the story that's being shared in that section. So yeah, there's a couple of call-outs that I'll get through sort of later at the point. But what it allowed you to do is, you read a certain section, so either it was him, being tortured in Belgium or being tortured at a camp, or explaining his life before or after, and relating that to a particular quote or a particular idea, and that might have been bringing around money, friends, love, happiness. So it was really good tie and made for really easy reading, to be honest. That was one thing. It's very personal. I believe a lot of these books tend to be quite personal, but you can tell that this is written in a way that it really draws you in. He keeps calling you his friend, which kind of invites you to read on and read about it more. And he doesn't hold back, obviously, noting the negative aspects of himself as well in some of these cases around the difference between forgiveness and vengeance. And he wasn't holding back and telling the truth that, after the Holocaust, it wasn't like he was all hunky-dory. And even though the book's actually called, The Happiest Man on Earth, he wasn't actually very happy for a long time after what eventuated. And, there was still the emotions post World War II were still hanging around over in Europe in the way that sort of forced him to move away. And it took him quite a long time to find happiness. But one of the biggest things I wanted to talk about with this book, and there's obviously a lot of stories through it, generally as there is with these Holocaust books, and they're deep, they're meaningful, they're incredibly tragic. But I've never heard this before or read about it before. So it was one I wanted to pull out. And that is the amazing story of the fact that Eddie not only escaped Auschwitz, but he actually smuggled himself back in. So that was something I'd never heard about before. So I wanted to pull it apart a little bit to kind of explain that. So in essence, to cut it down, he was able to befriend someone to, in essence, get himself a big tank or that he could sort of jump inside the actual tin can, I guess you want to call it, big can of food or whatever he was carrying. And then his friend would be able to throw that on top of the truck that was driving out of Auschwitz. He would kind of get alerted as to when he needed to roll, and then he would kind of fall off and then go on his merry way. So he actually somehow managed to do that and escape Auschwitz. So obviously at that point, amazing. But the next step of that was he then obviously had to just go out and find someone to help him out because he's wearing his jail clothes, he's got no food, no water, nothing. Like he's barely going to be able to survive. in the first household that he encounters after walking for ages, he essentially knocks on the door. An individual comes out and asks like, oh, kind of need some help. Can you help me out? The person doesn't really speak. They walk away for, I don't know if he mentions it, but say a minute, and he essentially comes back with a gun. So obviously the feelings there are still, this person's a Jew. He knows it's a Jew, so I'm going to take him out anyways. So Eddie takes off, away from the house, kind of zigzagging away, and he shoots at him 5 or 6 times, but on the 6th time, he actually gets him on his right calf, I believe it was. Eventually he decides, Eddie, that he actually can't live out here because he's going to get killed by someone. Just if he goes to someone's house, he's going to be killed by people still feeling their way towards Jews. So he actually found himself a way to smuggle himself back into Auschwitz as people were coming back to the camp, which I thought that's incredibly amazing. Just in the fortitude to go, oh, okay, I'm going to continue living, I'm going to have to go to one of these camps to even have any chance, which I thought that was just breathtaking. So it was quite amazing. Key principles from the book that I want to talk about. So there's 4 main ones, and these 4 main ones, again, were cut down helpfully from the subsections and the way that these chapters are broken up. So obviously, thank you, Eddie, my friend, for that. And they're these. 1, life can be beautiful if you make it beautiful. So a lot of things that he talks through in this book, Eddie, it's the ability that you can craft with your own hands what you see before you. There's that good saying, life is what you choose it to be. So, he talks about it a little bit later in the book and around his happiness, where he understood only after a long time that life can be beautiful if you make it beautiful. And it was the choice of actually putting your perspective and your focus into the things that you want and keeping that beauty around you. And obviously the perspective that he has, right? So he's obviously got this incredibly tragic experience that he went through, and then be able to compare that to normal life, and that obviously being a beautiful thing. The second one was weaknesses that can be turned into hatred. So this was not a comparison, but a story he was telling in relation to a lot of the Germans and a lot of his neighbors, his friends that he grew up with. And around this time where weakness turned into hatred, that is, there was a lot of individuals there who didn't want to partake, but they were essentially too weak to oppose what was being put in front of them, that is, to oppress the Jews in some form or fashion. And that weakness can turn into hatred, and just being really careful about that. If you lose your morals, you'll lose yourself. So this was an example from the book, again, a key theme where a lot of Eddie himself would call out a lot of people in the camps for losing the morals, and that was usually the capos, which was essentially the Jews turned into the supervisors and other individuals. But he himself called himself out, losing his morals when he was out of the camp, after liberation, just because of the way he was thinking and imagining things. And the last one I put of the key things was shared sorrow is half sorrow, and shared pleasure is double pleasure. So he had a good friend in the camp and through a lot of this, because he obviously lost his, I can't remember the exact number, but it was around 100 plus of his family members. He was the only one remaining, him and his sister. But he had his friend Kurt, and he's got it's almost like a side story that through the book, he talks about how he's friends with Kurt. He pretty much loses him multiple times, but finds him again in different camps, sometimes looking at it from one of the trains that was taking them to a different camp. He'd see him on the platform, and just amazingly, they somehow are able to connect back after the war, both of them surviving through all that tragedy. But he talked around, when you share a sorrow, it's sort of a half sorrow. And when you've got that shared pleasure, it's a double the pleasure. So he gave some good comparisons around when it was really painful when he had Kurt. He was able to sustain himself a lot longer, and I guess a lot easier, because he had that partnership, that friendship that allowed him to take that away. So, a big key theme, and he talked about it as well in other portions, is the importance of friendship, of community, and obviously those people around you that can help support you as well. So look, some final thoughts. I definitely recommend. So this was a 7.5 for me. It's a really, really good book. I thought I'd get quite used to reading those Holocaust books, but I didn't with this one. And it was really enjoyable read because of the way it's just so succinctly broken up into the various chapters. It keeps you coming back for more. Eddie, as he keeps calling you friends, is an enjoyable thing. And yeah, I mean, just the perspective that these books provide, I guess, in a pragmatic takeaway is what I always look for in these things. So whenever I look back again at my little learnings and notes that I take from books, especially these sort of books, it isn't this is my thing that I can do to improve work. This is the way I can do to shave 3 minutes off my run night, nothing like that. This is more around the perspective that it gives you through the true history that's happened and the stories that they tell. So one of the things, to finish it off, that he puts at the very back of the book, and obviously is touched upon all the time through this book, is, life can be beautiful if you make it beautiful, and it is up to you. So Eddie, my friend, thank you very much for putting together this book. He is a centenarian, so over 100 years old, living in Australia. I believe he's still alive as of this recording. Try to actually find him. So I was like, I'd love to connect with this person, maybe in a conversation, but I don't believe he's in many of the socials. But if this somehow finds its way to Eddie, mate, I'm smiling for you. Thank you very much for the writing. Really enjoyable. I recommend it, folks. The Immortals. That's been The Happiest Man on Earth by Eddie Jaku. Juan out.